The cafeteria windows screamed before the students did. Glass panes rattled violently in their frames. Trays of nachos clattered to the floor, and the fluorescent lights overhead flickered like a dying heartbeat. At first it sounded like thunder rolling, merciless, endless. But thunder didn't shake walls like this. Thunder didn't send hundreds of teenagers ducking beneath plastic lunch tables, covering their heads as if the sky itself was about to fall. Then came the roar, mechanical, brutal, rhythmic. It pulsed against their rib cages like a war drum. Teachers tried to steady the chaos, shouting orders drowned out by the monstrous sound. Phones appeared in trembling hands. Cameras raised instinctively. Through the east-facing windows, a shadow swallowed the Sunday. A machine too massive, too alien for a quiet Ohio suburb hovered into view. The tiltrotors of a V-22 Osprey churned the air into a violent storm, whipping paper bags, dust, and fallen leaves into spirals across the football field. "What the hell is that?" someone screamed. A tray of spaghetti slipped from a freshman's hands and hit the floor with a wet slap. The Osprey banked sharply, then descended with military precision. The cafeteria became a vacuum of awe. No one breathed, no one moved. A few students, football jocks who usually ruled the room, stared open-mouthed, their bravado reduced to wide-eyed fear. And then, above the deafening roar, the intercom crackled. Principal Corman's voice, usually calm and rehearsed, now quivered with disbelief. "Attention, attention, students. Lena Park, report to the main office immediately. I repeat, Lena Park, to the main office." Every head turned. Every phone camera shifted. At the far corner of the cafeteria, sitting alone at a cracked plastic table, Lena froze. The sound of her name carried through the chaos like a spotlight piercing darkness. The combat boots she wore that morning, mocked, sneered at, ridiculed, suddenly thundered in everyone's memory. Her faded Marine uniform, her father's, once a source of humiliation, now glowed with meaning no one could yet comprehend. The crowd parted before her, a tide of confusion, shock, and dawning realization. Students who had laughed hours earlier now stared with their mouths open, shame beginning to burn behind their eyes. Lena rose slowly, deliberately. Her chair screeched against the linoleum floor, a single note that sliced through the roar of the aircraft outside. She clutched the dog tags under her collar until the edges dug into her palm, sharp enough to leave marks. Her heart pounded like artillery fire. Every step toward the exit was filmed, whispered about, dissected in real time. What's happening? Why her? Is she in trouble? No. She's connected to that. She pushed open the heavy double doors and entered the hallway. It was silent, eerily so, as if the whole building had agreed to hold its breath. Teachers stood frozen in their doorways. Even the class clown who had tripped her earlier that week stared, pale and rigid, his smirk gone like it had never existed. Outside, the Osprey's rotors slowed but did not stop. Figures began to emerge from the aircraft, men and women in crisp dress uniforms, their shoes gleaming, brass medals catching the Sunday. They moved like shadows of history, disciplined, unshaken, as though the chaos of teenage whispers meant nothing. And at their center stood a woman in her 60s, her hair silver, her shoulders squared with unbreakable resolve. Her uniform was heavy with ribbons, each a story of war, blood, sacrifice. Her eyes scanned the crowd and landed directly on Lena. The school's world tilted. The girl mocked as wannabe soldier was no joke at all. She was the daughter of a man whose name the military still carried in silence and reverence, and the military had come for her. But why? The question burned in every face pressed against the cafeteria windows. And Lena, her breath shallow, her body trembling, was about to find out. That morning had begun with nothing but silence and dread. The yellow school bus screeched to a stop, releasing a gust of exhaust that mixed with the crisp October air of Jefferson, Ohio. Students poured out, laughing, tossing footballs, and clutching iced coffees. Their chatter was the familiar symphony of teenage indifference. And then she stepped off. Lena Park, 17 years old, thin, quiet, and invisible. Most days, but not today. Her boots hit the pavement first, the kind that didn't squeak like sneakers but echoed with authority, too heavy for a girl her size. Her faded Marine camouflage hung loose on her frame, sleeves rolled up to reveal trembling wrists. The jacket smelled faintly of smoke and cedar, like it still carried the ghosts of a battlefield half a world away. Around her neck, tucked beneath her collar, clinked a pair of dog tags that only she knew were there. It was supposed to be private, a ritual, a way to survive this date. But Jefferson High had a way of turning survival into spectacle. Wait, are you serious right now? The shrill voice belonged to Alyssa Crane, queen of Jefferson High, her blonde hair pinned, straight, her sweater flawless. She laughed loud enough for the parking lot to hear, her voice slicing the morning calm. Is it, like, costume day? Did I miss a memo? Laughter rippled, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Phones were out in seconds, cameras flashing as captions wrote themselves across glowing screens. Private Barbie has reported for duty. Wannabe G.I. Jane. Somebody call the recruiter. Every step Lena took toward the school doors seemed amplified, the mocking voices layering over one another until they became a storm. Near the row of pickup trucks, football players gathered. Their leader, Brandon Holt, quarterback and self-appointed king, smirked. He puffed his chest and began marching in an exaggerated drill formation. Left, right, left, right, left, he barked in a butcher drill sergeant's voice. His teammates followed, saluting mockingly, some stomping in unison. 10 hut, Brandon shouted, nearly doubling over in laughter. Make way for General Park. The laughter hit her like gravel against skin. But Lena didn't stop, didn't flinch, didn't even glance their way. Her spine stayed straight, just as her father had taught her. Stand tall even when the world tries to cut you down. But her hands betrayed her shaking as she clutched her books. Her breath caught when the wind carried the faint scent of her father's cologne from the jacket's fabric. It comforted her, but it broke her too. The truth was unbearable, and no one here could know. 5 years ago today, her father, Master Sergeant Daniel Park, had died in Fallujah, Iraq. His convoy had been hit by an IED. He dragged 3 wounded men out before the second blast ended him. His name was etched into the granite of Arlington, carved into history. And this uniform, hanging loose on his daughter's frame, was the only thing that kept her close to him. Her mother couldn't bear anniversaries. She drowned herself in work, in silence, in forgetting. But Lena couldn't forget. Each year, she wore the uniform, not for spectacle, not for pity. For him, she wanted to make it through unnoticed, to mourn quietly in the shadows of Jefferson High's indifference. But teenagers had a way of sniffing out weakness like blood in water. By the time Lena reached her locker, the whispers had grown claws. Conversations died mid-sentence as students turned to watch her, their eyes wide with cruel delight. And then she saw it. A sheet of notebook paper taped to her locker door. The words were scrawled in thick black marker. Private loser wants attention. Her breath hitched. The letters blurred as her eyes stung. She tore it down too hard, crumpling the paper in her fist until her knuckles turned white. Behind her, a boy snickered. Guess she didn't get the memo. It's not cosplay day. Her hands shook as she turned her lock, the numbers slippery under her sweaty fingers. When the locker finally opened, she glanced at the small square mirror taped inside. For a split second, she saw him. Her father, standing behind her in his uniform, a steady hand resting on her shoulder, eyes kind but firm. Stand tall, Lena. Dignity is the weapon they can't take from you. She blinked and he was gone. Just her, trembling, with dog tags heavy against her chest. The first bell rang, jolting her forward. She gathered her books and whispered under her breath, steadying herself. Just get through today. But she was wrong. This day was only beginning. Chemistry was supposed to be the one safe place. Numbers, formulas, equations, things that always added up, unlike the twisted logic of Jefferson High. Lena slipped into her usual seat in the back row, hoping the camouflage would blend her into the background. But predators never forget their prey. Ethan Hayes sat 2 rows up, legs sprawled like the room belonged to him. He was the kind of boy who thrived on chaos, always looking for an audience. Today, Lena's uniform gave him a stage. He smirked as soon as he spotted her. Mrs. Patterson, hunched over the whiteboard, scribbled chemical bonds with her usual monotone lecture. Covalent bonding occurs when 2 atoms share electrons. Ethan's hand shot up. Can I sharpen my pencil? His tone was innocent, but his eyes glittered. Without waiting for permission, he strutted toward the sharpener, deliberately detouring past Lena's desk. His stomach dropped. With one sweeping motion of his arm, Ethan accidentally knocked her textbook, notebook, and pencil case to the floor. They scattered with a loud crash, pens rolling in every direction. Oops! His voice dripped false apology. He crouched low, but instead of helping, he made explosion noises. Boom! Kaboom! His hands mimed blasts, tearing through the air. Duck and cover, soldier! The class erupted. Giggles rippled through the room. Shoulders shook as kids tried and failed to smother their laughter. Others didn't even bother, openly pointing at Lena like she was entertainment. She bent down to gather her things, her father's sleeves too long for her frame dragging across the floor. Her fingers fumbled, her pulse pounding in her ears. Ethan leaned closer, his whisper loud enough for half the room to hear. Careful, Private Park. Wouldn't want you to call in an airstrike on chemistry class. He kicked her pencil a few inches farther under the desk, grinning as she stretched awkwardly to reach it. More laughter. Another knife to her ribs. Her face burned hot, humiliation rising like bile. Every instinct screamed to fight back, to slam her fist into his smug grin, to remind them all that her father had faced real fire while Ethan played soldier for laughs. But she froze. She could hear her father's voice again, calm and steady. You don't waste bullets on clowns, you save them for real battles. Her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She scooped up the last of her things and forced herself upright, her fists trembling at her sides. Mrs. Patterson still had her back turned, oblivious. Ethan returned to his desk, basking in the glow of his audience. Man, I love chemistry, he whispered, loud enough for everyone. So many explosions. More snickers, more whispers. Lena slid into her seat, her vision swimming. She stared at her notebook, but the formulas on the page blurred, meaningless scribbles in a world that made no sense. By the time the bell rang, she felt carved hollow, as if 1,000 invisible cuts had bled her dignity dry. In the hallway, the whispers continued. What's she doing? Is she crazy? Why's she dressed like that? Every word felt like gravel in her shoes, small irritations that became unbearable with every step. And still, she walked. Because stopping meant surrender. But she was cracking. By lunch, she would be tested again. And this time, it wouldn't be a whisper or a joke. It would be a war. The cafeteria was already a battlefield before Lena even entered. The roar of voices, the crash of trays, the rank smell of reheated pizza and tater tots. It was chaos disguised as routine. Normally, she would slip into the farthest corner, eat quickly, and vanish before anyone noticed. But today, there was no hiding. The second she stepped inside, the noise shifted. It wasn't silence, not yet, but a ripple of awareness that spread like a wave. Heads turned, forks paused halfway to mouths. Whispers shot across tables like sparks. There she is. Private Park, reporting for duty. Is she seriously still wearing that? Phones were lifted discreetly, then not so discreetly. She was trending inside her own school before she had even sat down. Lena grabbed a tray, though her appetite was gone. The lunch lady, a weary woman with kind eyes, paused for a moment, her gaze lingering on Lena's uniform. She didn't say anything, but the subtle shake of her head carried pity that cut deeper than any insult. Lena took her tray and walked to the corner table. Alone, always alone. She set her sandwich down and tried to focus on chewing, but each bite turned to ash in her mouth. Every laugh from nearby tables felt like it was directed at her. Every whisper, every sideways glance, sharpened like a blade. She thought maybe, just maybe, she would make it through. But fate wasn't done yet. The room shifted as if pulled by an invisible current, and then she appeared. Alusa Crane. The queen of Jefferson High didn't walk, she glided. Her designer boots clicked against the linoleum, her entourage trailing behind like hand-picked shadows. Maya Ruiz and Chloe Summers' perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect cruelty. The cafeteria buzzed as Alyssa stopped at Lena's table. With the confidence of someone who had never known consequences, she slid onto the bench across from her, smiling a predator's smile. Well, well, Alyssa began, her voice pitched high enough to carry across the room. Look at you, going full Army Barbie. How patriotic. Snickers rippled, phones discreetly angled toward the scene. Lena said nothing. She kept her fork clenched in her hand, knuckles white. Maya leaned in, her laugh like glass breaking. I mean, there are actual stores in this town. Cute ones. Ever thought of shopping at one? Chloe giggled, twirling her hair. Or is Camo the new black? Did we miss the memo? Lena's chest tightened. Her father's jacket suddenly felt like lead. Alyssa tilted her head, feigning concern. Her smile dripping venom. You know, Lena, you're kind of making people uncomfortable. Like, we get it. You want to be different. But maybe tone it down before you end up on some watch list, you know? The cafeteria quieted. The air thickened, charged with the anticipation of blood. Lena's hand trembled on her fork. Her vision blurred, but she refused to let the tears fall here. Not in front of them. Alyssa leaned closer, her final strike sharp and cruel. What are you going to do, huh? Call your daddy to come save you? The words detonated in the silence. Gasps rippled. Even some of Alyssa's followers shifted uncomfortably, their smiles faltering. Lena stood. The scrape of her chair against the floor was loud enough to echo. Her eyes burned with fury, her face pale but fierce. For a moment, Alyssa's smirk slipped. You have no idea what you're talking about, Lena said, her voice low, steady, but edged with danger. Alyssa laughed, louder now, emboldened by the audience. Oh, please, don't act like you're some war hero. You're just a girl playing dress-up, nothing more. The cafeteria was a coliseum now. Every student leaning forward, every phone recording, every breath held. And then it happened. A low rumble, distant but growing, cut through the silence. At first, people thought it was thunder. But thunder didn't shake ceiling tiles. Thunder didn't rattle trays. Thunder didn't build into a deafening roar that made windows quiver. The room erupted into chaos. Students screamed, ducking under tables. Teachers shouted orders no one could hear. Lena froze, her heart racing. She knew that sound. The osprey was coming, and it was coming for her. The cafeteria was chaos, forks clattering, trays overturned, students screaming. But outside, the roar grew louder, sharper, like the sky itself had been split in half. The floor vibrated beneath their feet. Some swore the ceiling lights would crash down. A teacher ducked under a table, shouting, "Stay calm, it's probably—" But her voice was drowned out as a shadow swept across the windows. The cafeteria plunged into semi-darkness. Every student who had mocked Lena that morning, every smirk, every cruel laugh now stared wide-eyed at the impossible sight outside. Phones rose like 1,000 periscopes, screens glowing as shaky hands recorded. The V-22 Osprey hovered above the football field, its twin rotors slicing the air with the violence of war. Dust swirled into a cyclone. The American flag on the school's pole snapped taut, nearly ripping from its mount. The aircraft banked, tilted, then descended with predatory precision. The noise was unbearable, like standing inside a hurricane. Lena's knees locked. Her chest burned with a strange mix of terror and recognition. She knew that sound. She had heard it once before 5 years ago at Arlington, when they'd buried her father. That same thunder had carried a casket draped in the flag. The Osprey touched down on the 50-yard line. The cafeteria windows rattled so hard that one cracked, spiderwebbing across the glass. Students gasped, pressing closer, torn between fear and fascination. And then the side hatch lowered. Boots hit the turf in perfect synchronization. Soldiers in immaculate dress uniforms emerged, their movements crisp, rehearsed, reverent. Medals glinted against their chests, ribbons speaking stories none of these students could fathom. The noise in the cafeteria dropped to silence. Even Alyssa Crane's smile froze, brittle as glass. At the center of the formation, stepping down with an authority that bent the air around her, was a tall woman with silver hair pulled into a regulation bun. Her posture radiated command, her chest heavy with decorations. Her eyes, sharp as razors, scanned the school building like a battlefield. General Margaret Kane, a woman Lena recognized instantly. She had been there, at her doorstep, in the dead of night, 5 years ago. The officer who had delivered the words that shattered her childhood. Your father gave his life in Fallujah. Now she was here, in Jefferson, Ohio. At Jefferson High, and she was looking for Lena. The intercom crackled overhead, shaky, breathless. Principal Corman's voice was thin with disbelief. Attention, students and faculty. We have a situation developing. Lena Park, report to the main office immediately. Repeat. Lena Park. 1,000 heads turned. The cafeteria shifted. The girl they had laughed at, shoved aside, humiliated, was the name on the loudspeaker. Lena's fork clattered from her hand onto the tray. She stood slowly, each movement deliberate, heavy with inevitability. Her boots struck the floor like drumbeats of history. The crowd parted. Phones lifted higher. Not a single laugh now, only the deafening silence of awe and confusion. Alyssa sat frozen, her perfect hair whipping slightly from the vibrations outside. Her earlier words, "Call your daddy to come save you," now echoed in her skull like a curse. Ethan Hayes swallowed hard, his hands trembling, the explosion jokes he'd made in chemistry now burning him alive from the inside. Lena walked through the cafeteria doors and into the hallway. Silence. Teachers stood in their doorways, eyes wide. Students pressed against lockers, watching her pass like she was marching through history itself. Each step forward was filmed, each breath captured. The girl mocked as private loser now carried herself with the composure of a soldier reporting for duty. Through the glass hallway windows, Lena saw the soldiers forming a line on the football field, their boots gleaming. At their center stood General Kane, her hands clasped behind her back, her presence radiating power. The Osprey's rotors still spun, the air shimmering with heat and dust. And for the first time, Lena realized they hadn't come here to scare her. They hadn't come here for the school. They had come for her. The hallway doors blew open as Lena stepped outside. The roar of the Osprey filled her lungs, vibrating in her chest like an extra heartbeat. The October wind whipped at her father's jacket, snapping the loose sleeves against her arms as if urging her forward. The football field was no longer a place of touchdowns and cheerleaders. It had become a stage, transformed by the storm of steel and blades above. The grass bent under the weight of the downdraft, chalk lines disappearing into dust clouds. Students poured from every door, abandoning their lunches, their classes, their routines. What had begun as curiosity had become a mass exodus. 2,000 bodies gathered around the chain-link fence, pressing against it, climbing it, desperate for a better view. Teachers shouted for order, but their voices were swallowed by the aircraft's roar. Even the faculty, some veterans themselves, stood rooted in awe. Their eyes fixed on the soldiers, assembled with parade ground precision. The formation was immaculate. 12 soldiers, their dress blues sharp, brass polished to mirror gleam, boots aligned like they were carved from the same mold. Each one carried the weight of silence, an aura that Jefferson High's chaotic teenage energy could not touch. And at the front, General Margaret Kane. Her presence was a command in itself. Silver hair bound tight, cap angled perfectly, ribbons sprawled across her chest, some Lena didn't even recognize, though she had grown up learning the language of metals from her father. Kane's gaze was unyielding, the kind that could silence a battlefield. Principal Corman stood beside her, dwarfed, sweating through his collar. He clutched the intercom mic as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Students," his voice crackled through the speakers, "remain calm, remain in place." But there was no calm. The field buzzed with whispers, a hive of fear and fascination. Why are they here? Is it a drill? No, it's for her. It's for Lena. Lena's combat boots crunched on the gravel path leading from the school to the field. The crowd parted without a word. The same students who had mocked her hours earlier now stepped back as though she carried fire in her hands. Phones filmed her every stride. Her humiliation had gone viral this morning. Now the same cameras captured her ascension. Her throat was tight, her palms damp inside her father's sleeves. With each step, she felt like she was walking toward judgment or destiny, maybe both. She remembered being 10 years old, standing on the front porch when 2 black sedans pulled up. She remembered General Kane in her pressed uniform, eyes shadowed with something Lena hadn't understood then. She remembered her mother's scream, her own knees buckling, the flag folded into a triangle and pressed into trembling hands. And now Kane was here again. When Lena reached the track that circled the field, 2 junior officers in white gloves stepped forward. Their shoes clicked in perfect rhythm as they escorted her to the center. The murmur of the crowd swelled, students pressing against one another, desperate to see. Alyssa Crane stood near the bleachers, pale and rigid, her entourage whispering frantic questions she couldn't answer. She couldn't tear her eyes away from Lena. She had mocked her, she had laughed at her, and now she was watching the girl she'd humiliated walk with soldiers, as if she belonged among them. Ethan Hayes, the joker, the bully, had no jokes left. His face was green. He rubbed the back of his neck with trembling fingers, each memory of his kaboom jokes digging into his skin like barbed wire. Lena stopped in front of General Kane. The Osprey's rotors slowed, the sound lowering from a scream to a growl. Dust settled over the field, clinging to hair, faces, jackets. General Kane stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Lena. Her voice carried through a portable speaker, clear and sharp, slicing through the silence of 2,000 witnesses. "Ladies and gentlemen of Jefferson High School," she began, "we stand here today to honor sacrifice." The crowd stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause. 5 years ago, Master Sergeant Daniel Park, communications specialist, leader, father gave his life in Fallujah, Iraq. When his convoy was ambushed, he left the safety of his vehicle to establish a comms link that would bring rescue to his trapped unit. He died completing that mission. 14 soldiers lived because of him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some students covered their mouths. Others blinked back tears they didn't understand. For most of them, war was a headline, a history lesson. But now it had a name, a face, and a daughter standing before them. Lena's heart cracked. She'd heard this story before in letters, in the clipped voice of military reports, but never spoken aloud like this, to a crowd that had once mocked her for wearing his uniform. Her father's story filled the air, drowning out the jeers, rewriting every cruel caption that had spread through their phones. General Kane's voice softened, but only slightly. His daughter has carried that legacy with quiet dignity. Every year on this date, she wears his uniform. Not for attention, not for vanity, but for remembrance. Lena felt every eye on her, the sting of 1,000 gazes. But this time, it wasn't ridicule, it was reverence. General Kane turned, and an aide stepped forward carrying a wooden case. The crowd leaned forward, hungry, as if sensing history in motion. Kane opened the case slowly, revealing a folded American flag, crisp, perfect, heavy with meaning. "This flag," she declared, "flew over the forward operating base where Daniel Park served. It has waited until today to find its rightful place." The aide handed it to Lena. Her hands trembled, the fabric warm under her touch. She clutched it to her chest, her father's jacket pressing against it, her tears spilling freely now. Phones captured everything. And then Kane reached for the second box, a smaller one, polished, gleaming. The crowd held its breath. General Kane lifted the smaller wooden box, holding it high so the sunlight caught the polished surface. Even before she opened it, Lena felt the air around her tighten, as if the entire schoolyard sensed what lay inside. The silence deepened, 2,000 breaths suspended, the weight of history pressing against teenage chatter and cafeteria gossip until they evaporated into nothing. When the lid lifted, gasps rippled through the crowd. Inside lay a metal bronze starburst, blue ribbon, shimmering in the October light. Not the Medal of Honor that Lena had seen once at Arlington, but a silver star, America's third highest military decoration for valor. To students who'd never heard of it, it was just another piece of metal. But to the veterans in the crowd, the history teacher, the janitor with faded tattoos peeking from his sleeves, it was lightning. "This," General Kane declared, her voice steady, "was awarded to Master Sergeant Daniel Park for extraordinary heroism in combat. He is gone, but today it belongs to his daughter." Her hands, white-gloved and unwavering, pinned the silver star onto the camouflage jacket, onto Lena. The weight hit her like a blow. Suddenly she was drowning, her chest heaving, her vision blurring. For 5 years she had carried grief like a shadow, invisible to everyone else. Now the shadow was on display, pinned to her heart in front of the entire school. The crowd erupted, not with casual applause, not with a lazy clapping reserved for assemblies, but with something deeper. Reverence. Awe. Teachers who had stood in Jefferson High for decades wiped at their eyes. Students who had mocked Lena that very morning clapped until their hands stung, until tears blurred their screens as they kept recording. Lena clutched the flag to her chest, her knees trembling. She wanted to crumble, to scream, to vanish, but she stood, because if she fell, it would dishonor him. General Kane leaned close, her voice dropping low, meant only for Lena. "He would be proud, child. You've carried him with dignity. Now the world knows." The words shattered something inside Lena. The tears she had held back for 5 years finally broke free. She wept not softly, not quietly, but raw, unrestrained. And the field wept with her. Students wiped their faces, unsure why. Some had never cared about the war, never known the names on the evening news. Yet here they stood, crying with the daughter of a man they had never met. Behind the bleachers, Alyssa Crane's legs gave out. She sank onto the grass, her perfect world cracking. "Call your daddy to come save you." The words replayed like poison in her skull. She'd said them hours earlier. Now she wished she could rip them out of the air. Bury them. Burn them. Her eyes filled, not with compassion, but with terror of her own cruelty exposed. Ethan Hayes pressed his fists against his eyes. His stomach churned. The explosion noises he'd made in chemistry replayed, each kaboom transformed into the sound of a real blast tearing through a desert convoy. His body shook as the reality of his mockery consumed him. Lena stood on the field, drenched in sunlight, the silver star pinned to her chest, the folded flag heavy in her arms. Around her, the noise of the Osprey's rotors softened into background thunder. But the storm inside her raged. She had endured humiliation, cruelty, endless whispers. Now the truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to all of them. And for the first time, she felt her father's hand not imagined. Not a memory, but alive, steadying her spine from within. The girl they had mocked was gone. In her place stood a soldier's daughter. The applause finally ebbed into silence, not because the moment had lost its weight, but because no one dared break the sanctity of what they had witnessed. The Osprey's rotors whined at a low idle, stirring the air like a restless giant, while General Kane stepped back, giving Lena the field, giving her the weight of thousands of eyes. Lena's face was still wet with tears, the silver star gleaming just below her collarbone. She clutched the folded flag so tightly that her fingers ached, but she would not let go. This symbol, this fabric was more than cloth. It was her father's breath, his blood, his last heartbeat. The crowd slowly began to stir, students exchanging nervous glances. For the first time, no one dared whisper about Lena Park, as if she were an oddity. They stared at her now like she was untouchable, something forged in fire they could never comprehend. And then Ethan Hayes moved. His sneakers scraped the track as he stumbled forward, his face pale and blotched. The laughter and arrogance he wore like armor were gone, stripped away by the weight of truth. His voice cracked as he stopped a few feet from Lena, unable to look her in the eye at first. I'm sorry," he whispered. It was barely audible, but the microphone near the podium caught it, carrying his words across the field. 2,000 people heard him choke on guilt. I didn't know your dad was..." His voice broke completely. He dragged a sleeve across his eyes. "I made jokes. About bombs, about..." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry." Lena stared at him, her hands trembling around the flag. She saw not the cruel boy from chemistry class, but a scared teenager, suddenly aware that his words had weight, that cruelty could cut deeper than bullets. Her voice was quiet, steady. "He was a hero." Ethan nodded, biting his lip until it bled. "And now," Lena continued, her eyes boring into him, "you understand why I wear this uniform. Not for attention, not for you, for him." Ethan's chest hitched. He nodded again, then stepped back, his shoulders slumped, his shame naked for the whole school to see. The crowd parted again. This time, it was Alyssa Crane. She walked slowly, like someone approaching her own execution. Her perfect blonde hair, once her crown, now hung lifeless around her face. The queen bee of Jefferson High trembled with each step. Her hands shook, and for once, her eyes couldn't find an audience. When she stopped in front of Lena, silence fell harder than before. The same students who had once cheered her cruelty now waited for her reckoning. "Lena," her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. Her throat closed. She looked down at her boots, ashamed. "I said things, cruel things, about your dad. She faltered. For the first time in her reign, Alyssa Crane had no words, no power. Lena's gaze didn't soften. She didn't lash out either. Her voice was calm but sharper than any knife. "You didn't ask." Alyssa blinked, confused. You didn't ask what this uniform meant. You didn't ask why I wore it. You didn't care. You saw something different and you made it a target, that's all. Alyssa's lips trembled. Her eyes brimmed, but not with the same tears Lena carried. These were selfish, desperate tears. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't want to know. The words struck harder than any insult. The crowd murmured, shifting uncomfortably. Alyssa stood in front of Lena like a dethroned monarch, her power evaporating in the face of truth. General Kane's eyes flicked toward Lena, measuring her strength. Pride glimmered beneath her stern expression. The Osprey's engines whined louder, signaling departure. Soldiers began to reform their lines, their movements crisp, efficient, inevitable. But Jefferson High would never be the same. Phones captured the moment Ethan Hayes broke down in shame. They captured Alyssa Crane, stripped of her cruelty, facing the girl she had mocked. By sundown, those videos would spread beyond the town, beyond the state. The story of Lena Park, the soldier's daughter, would travel farther than whispers of mockery ever had. As the soldiers prepared to board, Lena remained still, the silver star pinned to her father's jacket, the folded flag heavy in her arms. For the first time since that night 5 years ago, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like she was standing. The Osprey's engines roared back to life, a mechanical hurricane that whipped the football field into chaos. Dust spiraled into the sky, loose papers and hats flying. Students shielded their faces, phones still raised, desperate to capture the last moments of an event that would etch itself into Jefferson High's history forever. Soldiers marched in precise formation back toward the aircraft, each step deliberate, every movement a display of discipline that most of the crowd had only seen in movies. The rumble of the rotors grew deafening, shaking the bleachers, rattling bones. But no one left. No one dared. They watched Lena. She stood in the center of the field, boots planted firm, holding the folded flag to her chest, the silver star gleaming on her father's jacket. The storm of wind battered her, but she did not move. She was no longer the girl they whispered about, no longer the victim of notes taped to lockers or jokes whispered behind hands. She was something else now, untouchable, larger than the cruelty that had tried to crush her. General Kane paused at the hatch of the Osprey, turning once more. Her eyes found Lena in the storm. With a single nod, barely perceptible, but unmistakable, she saluted. The gesture was small, but it cracked the crowd wide open. Every teacher snapped to attention instinctively, veterans saluting without hesitation. Even Principal Corman raised a trembling hand to his brow. And though the students didn't know the protocol, many mimicked the gesture, awkward but sincere, their faces wet, their hearts pounding with something they didn't yet understand. The Osprey lifted, slow at first, then rising into the bruised October sky. The downdraft slammed against the field, nearly knocking some students off their feet. Hair whipped, jackets flapped, tears streamed sideways. The machine climbed higher, tilting gracefully before banking away. Its roar faded into the horizon, until the only sound left was the echo of what it had carried. Silence blanketed the field. 2,000 people stood together, staring at Lena. And in that silence, something fundamental cracked inside Jefferson High. The hierarchy Alyssa had ruled for years, the cruel games, the easy mockery, the shallow power of beauty and status, looked meaningless in the shadow of a folded flag and a silver star. No one cared about homecoming week, or football standings, or Instagram captions. Not when a girl their own age had just shown them what sacrifice, legacy, and dignity truly meant. Slowly, the crowd dispersed. Voices hushed, as if they had just left a funeral or a church. Teachers ushered students back toward the building, though even they walked differently, shoulders squared, eyes lowered in thought. Alyssa remained on the bleachers long after everyone else moved. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her hands limp at her sides. For once, she wasn't thinking about her image or her followers. She was thinking about the knife-edge words she'd thrown at Lena and the fact that they could never be unsaid. Ethan Hayes leaned against the fence, his face pale. He didn't even look at his phone, something unheard of for him. For the first time, he was afraid of being remembered, not forgotten. And Lena? She stood alone at the 50-yard line, staring at the horizon where the Osprey had vanished. The folded flag was warm against her chest. The metal gleamed, catching the last shard of sunlight before the clouds swallowed it. Her father felt closer than he had in years. His voice echoed in her mind, not memory, but presence. Stand tall, Lena. You're not alone anymore. She let out a shaky breath, her tears drying in the cool wind. The girl who had entered the day mocked, humiliated, and broken was gone. What remained was a daughter carrying her father's legacy, a soldier's shadow made flesh. And Jefferson High would never forget her. The field was empty by late afternoon, the grass still bent from the osprey's violent descent. Only one figure remained. Lena Park stood in the middle of the 50-yard line, the folded flag pressed to her chest, the silver star pinned above her heart. The wind had settled, but her body still trembled with the echoes of the storm. She could feel the weight of thousands of eyes even now, though the bleachers were vacant. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like the shadow of grief people whispered about in hushed pity. She felt seen. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, relentless. Dozens, no, hundreds of notifications pouring in. Posts, clips, hashtags. She didn't need to look to know her face, her father's story, and the ceremony had already gone viral. Jefferson High's cruelty, immortalized that morning, was being rewritten by the images of the afternoon. A girl standing in her father's uniform, a general saluting her, a medal pinned over her trembling heart. In town, parents were already calling one another. Veterans groups were mobilizing. News crews were being dispatched. What began as teenage ridicule was now a story racing beyond Jefferson, beyond Ohio, beyond high school walls. But Lena didn't think about that. She thought about her father. She thought about the long nights she had cried into his jacket, the mornings she had looked at his photograph before school, the countless times she had wanted to scream at the world for forgetting him. And now they would never forget. His name was carved into them all. Bootsteps crunched behind her. She turned to see Principal Corman, his face pale, his tie flapping in the wind. He cleared his throat, but words failed him. He'd been running assemblies for decades, but never had he stood speechless like this. After a long moment, he simply nodded and whispered, "We're proud of you, Lena." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. By the next day, apologies would rain down on her. Students who had ignored her for years would try to sit with her, speak to her, borrow dignity from proximity. Some would be sincere, most not. But Lena already knew who they were. She had seen their faces in the cafeteria, the parking lot, the hallways. She remembered the smirks, the laughter, the notes taped to her locker. She would not forget. Ethan Hayes would stop cracking jokes. Alyssa Crane would vanish from social media for weeks, her empire of followers crumbling under the weight of her own shame. Jefferson High would change, but Lena would not go back to who she had been. She would carry her father forward. The osprey's roar was gone now, but in Lena's ears, it lingered like a heartbeat. She could almost see him beside her, the man with the steady eyes, the strong hands, the quiet smile that said everything would be all right. She felt his arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the next step, the next battle, the next day. And as the sun sank over the Ohio horizon, Lena finally whispered aloud what she had kept locked in her chest for years. "I'm proud of you, Dad." The words didn't vanish. They stayed, carried on the wind, wrapping around her like the flag in her arms. And Jefferson High would never again see her as a joke. They would see her as a soldier's daughter, forged in sacrifice, walking proof that dignity can rise even from the deepest humiliation. The story would spread. News anchors would repeat her father's name. Veterans would write letters. Strangers would share her image, captioned with words she never expected. Hero, courage, legacy. But for Lena, it wasn't about them. It was about him. She tightened her grip on the flag, lifted her chin, and walked off the field with steady, unbroken steps. The girl was gone. The legacy remained. By morning, Jefferson High had learned how to whisper with its eyes. The hallways, once a carnival of noise, moved in hushes and sidelong glances, like the building itself was trying not to startle something sacred. Posters for homecoming curled on the corkboards, suddenly flimsy, their glitter glue dulled by the memory of blades of wind and steel. Lena stepped off the bus, and the pavement did not jeer. Her boots found their rhythm, measured, steady, the same click and drag that had carried her across the football field into 2,000 stunned faces. No one laughed. No one blocked her path. The current of students divided and closed again, as if she were an icebreaker cutting through a crowded sea. Phone screens lit as she passed, but not with captions sharp as glass. Now they trembled in hands that once smirked. At her locker, the metal door wore a new adornment. A ribbon of red, white, and blue threaded through the vents, tied in a careful knot. No note this time. No rage, letter in black marker. The knot was imperfect, uneven loops, a tail too long. She knew instantly it wasn't for show. Somebody with clumsy fingers had stood here early and tried to say something without words. She opened the locker and her eyes fell on the mirror she'd taped inside. Not the ghost of her father this time, but the silver star glinting low against her collarbone, tucked under the jacket. She exhaled, slow and hot. The metal could stay hidden, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she had already lived yesterday in the open, and grief needed a shoulder to rest on in private. Lena. The voice startled her. She turned to see Ethan Hayes, taller than she remembered, smaller than he had ever acted, standing a cautious arm's length away. No swagger, no audience. His backpack hung off one shoulder like it was too heavy for him now. He swallowed, voice frayed. I'm supposed to, in first period. Miss Patel said I should, that I needed to say it in front of everyone. The words stumbled over each other, clumsy and scared. You don't owe me a performance, Lena said. Her tone wasn't warm, it wasn't cold. It was iron set to room temperature. It's not for you, he blurted, then flinched at his own words. I mean it is, but it's also for… He choked, rubbed the back of his neck, and tried again. I keep hearing myself making those sounds. The explosion jokes. They sound different in my head now. They sound like somebody dying. His eyes filled, not with showy tears, but with the kind that embarrass you because they make you honest. Lena closed her locker. Then say what you need to say. He nodded once, like a soldier saluting an order. First period, he repeated, as if repeating the time could keep him from running. As he left, footsteps that used to swagger reduced themselves to function. Chemistry was first. The room smelled of ethanol and dry erase marker, the same line of periodic tables staring down from the wall, smug in their certainty. Miss Patel, short, precise, a rumor of steel beneath gentle eyes, stood at the front with a clipboard. The class filled in, slower than usual. Nobody took the chair behind Lena. Nobody dared. Ethan hovered near the door until she beckoned him with a small nod. Miss Patel looked at him, then at the room. The softest clearing of her throat was louder than yesterday's laughter. Before we begin, she said, Ethan has something to say. The chairs creaked as everyone turned. Even the students who lived for chaos didn't crack jokes. Jefferson High's metabolism had changed overnight. Cruelty no longer burned clean. Ethan stepped to the front. For once, he didn't glance at the clock, the floor, his phone. He faced them, hands shaking. What I did yesterday, he said, wasn't funny. I pretended it was a game. I pretended she was a target. I pretended a war was a punchline. I made bomb noises. His voice broke. He swallowed hard. I hurt someone who already hurt enough. I'm sorry. There were 100 other things he could have said to make himself look better. Context, intention, the fossilized script of teenage apologies. He said none of them. The silence sat with him like a witness. Miss Patel nodded once. Thank you, she said, like a verdict and a mercy both. Then she set the clipboard down and looked at the class. We'll review energy transfer today, she began, and somewhere in the middle of ionic bonds and valence electrons, a few students remembered how to breathe. Lena took notes. She wrote neatly. She answered one question when asked, but the day had shifted into a spectrum of new colors. Between equations, she caught glimpses of Ethan's shoulders. Smaller now. She read the tension in the margins. A boy who had been a storm, deciding to be weather instead. Between second and third period, the hallway swelled again, and the school remembered it had a queen. Alyssa Crane arrived late, flanked by Maya and Chloe, both quieter, eyes darting like birds caught under a net. Alyssa had dressed for the stage. Black turtleneck, hair tied back, no lip gloss, strategic humility. A printed statement slipped from her binder in deliberate font. We grow, we learn. Yesterday was a teachable moment. She had recorded a video before first bell, lips trembling just enough. The algorithm would adore it. She saw Lena across the hall and began her approach, soft steps, palms open, eyes dewy with curated contrition. The crowd smelled performance from 10 lockers away. They watched, hungry for blood or absolution, whichever came seasoned right. Lena, Alyssa began, with a voice she'd picked from a therapist playlist. I want to say, stop, Lena said. The word was not cruel. It was simply a command that knew it could be obeyed. Alyssa froze. The room leaned in. I heard you yesterday, Lena continued. I don't need to hear you today. Alyssa blinked, confusion cracking her stagecraft. But people need to see. They saw. Lena tilted her head just enough to let the crowd see the blade without swinging it. You didn't ask then. You don't get to tell now. Something brittle inside Alyssa's perfect posture gave way. For the first time in her reign, the performance had no audience. The crowd did not clap. It did not boo. It held its breath while a girl who had been cut 1,000 times decided not to hand her knife to the one who did the cutting. Alyssa's jaw trembled. She nodded tiny, lost, and stepped back. Maya and Chloe didn't move to fill the space. A queen without a kingdom is just someone in a hallway holding paper. Third period dissolved without incident, the way a bruise fades into a dull ache still there, less vibrant. At lunch, the cafeteria sounded different. The pitch had changed, as if yesterday's engines had tuned the room. Lena had practiced how to walk through the double doors, how to make herself small, how to find the corner seat that kept her back to the wall. Today, the corner seat was occupied by a cluster of ROTC kids she'd barely noticed before: brown boots, tight buns, downturned eyes. They parted when they saw her, half stand, then think better of saluting. A boy with a crooked ear slid aside and gestured toward his tray. You, want this seat? I'm okay, Lena said gently. She picked a table in the middle. She set her tray down. The center of the room swallowed her without incident. That alone felt like a national holiday. Midway through a tasteless slice of pizza, the intercom coughed. Principal Corman's voice arrived, threadbare from last night's storm of calls and a lifetime of softer days. Lena Park, please come to my office. The cafeteria hummed, curiosity snagging onto hope and worry with equal claws. Corman's office had always felt too tidy for a school that leaked chaos. Framed degrees, a ficus that had outgrown its corner, a poster about leadership from 1999. He stood when she entered. The skin under his eyes had found new colors since yesterday. Lena, he said, and gestured to the chair opposite his desk. He didn't sit. I won't waste your time. She waited. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, a man trying to unlearn habit in one day. We failed you, he said. The room seemed to tilt. He hadn't said I'm sorry if you felt. He hadn't said we're all learning. He had used the verb like a clean cut. You put a note on your locker report in the system last month, he went on. It was flagged and dismissed as a prank. Teachers have documented comments. Some chose no action taken. Yesterday, he inhaled. Yesterday took it out of our hands, but it shouldn't have required rotors and ribbons for us to see you. Lena looked at the ficus. One leaf had a tear in it shaped like a crescent moon. We're instituting a reporting protocol, he said, voice turning into bullet points because that was how people like him made penance. Anonymous digital submissions go straight to the district's Title IX and anti-bullying office. Staff retraining, peer ambassadors, consequence ladders that actually mean something. The Veterans Club that used to be 5 students and a history teacher will have a faculty sponsor and a budget. And he hesitated, then met her eyes. You don't have to do any of this work for us. This isn't penance by proxy. She waited a beat. You asked me here to tell me a plan. Yes, he said, and to tell you something that doesn't fix what happened. He swallowed. I'm sorry. The words sat between them, heavy and small. Okay, Lena said. It wasn't absolution. It was acceptance of a sentence spoken clearly at last. Corman exhaled. General Kane called me this morning. Lena's fingers tightened on the chair. She called you? She asked about you. Not about the school. Not the media requests. Just you. He reached into a folder and slid a single page across the desk. She asked me to give you this. It's a number, direct line. She said you don't have to call. But if you wanted to talk to someone who knew him as a leader, not only as a father, the paper looked like any office scrap. A line of digits scrawled with a hand that had written orders and letters to families in the same pen. Lena folded it once and slipped it into the inside pocket of her father's jacket, where a letter had lived for years until it fell apart from rereading. "Is there anything you need?" Corman asked. Lena thought of lists she could build, policies, protections, a time machine. Instead, she said, "Respect." He nodded, throat tight. "Then we'll start there." She stood. He did too. For a moment, they weren't principal and student, but two people holding the same heavy side of a story. When she returned to the hallway, Jefferson opened around her again. The afternoon thinned into that oxygenless quiet unique to schools after lunch. Slow steps, lockers like metronomes, 1,000 adolescent hearts pretending not to ache. At her locker, a small cluster waited, unsure how to exist. The ROTC boy with the crooked ear. A girl from theater who had mimed incoming yesterday and hadn't slept since. A freshman with a military patch pinned upside down to her backpack, because nobody had shown her how to get right what she wanted to honor. The theater girl began, mascara flaking from swollen lids. "We're doing a Veterans Day assembly next month. We wanted to ask if you'd help us not screw it up." Lena looked at their faces, earnest and raw, ugly with sincerity. She remembered being 5, standing on a chair to reach her father's face, telling him she'd be brave while he was gone. She heard his laugh like a door opening. "I'll meet with you," she said. "I won't be your mascot." The freshman nodded like a bobblehead. We want to learn," she stammered. "Then we're even," Lena said. "So do I." They didn't know what to do with that, so they smiled like people digging with spoons and discovering they'd hit something that rang like metal. The last bell came, a mercy and a summons. The day spilled itself out the doors and onto sidewalks. By the time Lena reached the bus loop, the sky had gathered its clouds into a bruised sheet. The wind touched her face with a familiarity she no longer feared. She could almost feel a calloused hand adjusting her collar against the cold. "Lena." The voice was small and breathless. Alyssa again, but stripped of entourage, stripped of angles. She held no paper, no plan. Lena turned. "I don't know how to be the person who did that yesterday," Alyssa said, words tumbling over each other. "I woke up and I was still that person. I don't want to be. I don't know how to stop being her." The honesty was so naked, it almost looked like a wound. "You start by shutting up," Lena said, not unkindly. "You listen. You do small things nobody sees. You stop expecting applause." Alyssa's eyes filled. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Don't follow me," Lena added. "Don't post about me. Don't orbit me to glow. Do your work where I can't see it." Alyssa nodded, mouth pressed into a hard line like a child concentrating on not crying. The bus wheezed and opened its doors. Lena climbed in, the aisle a tunnel she'd traveled 1,000 times by habit and dread. Today it was just a path back to a house where she'd place the folded flag on the dining table and watch her mother's hands tremble for the first time in years. Halfway down the aisle, someone tapped the seat beside her. Ethan again, hovering, uncertain. "I'll sit somewhere else," he said quickly. I just wanted to say one more thing, in case I forget how to say it later." She raised an eyebrow. "I don't want this to be about my guilt," he said, breath coming too fast. "That makes it still about me." He swallowed. "Tell me where to show up." "Not near cameras. Just where it matters." Lena studied him for a long breath. Then she nodded at the floor. "Veterans Club meets Thursdays. Room 214. Chair squeaks. You'll hate it." He huffed a laugh that jumped at the edges like a badly tuned radio. "Good," he said. "I should." The bus pulled away. Jefferson High shrank in the rear window brick and field, flag and track, a circle of grass that still remembered the weight of a machine and the clarity of a salute. The building would learn, or it wouldn't. But Lena had chosen what she would be inside it. Not a spectacle, not a symbol, but a person with a story that outlived performance. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. DC area code. She stared at it until it stopped. The paper in her pocket warmed against her skin, as if numbers could carry body heat. General Kane had said, "Only if you want." She could wait. She could call. She could press the memory like a bruise to know it was still her own. Outside the window, the clouds tore enough to let a blade of light through. It fell across the aisle, thin as a dog tag chain. Lena closed her eyes and let it paint a line up her wrist. Respect, she had told the principal. It starts as a word, it becomes a practice, it ends as a habit. She opened her eyes as the bus turned onto her street. Home waited quiet, stubborn, a fortress made of grief and unwashed mugs and unanswered questions. She touched the place on her jacket where the silver star rested, and the metal answered with a cool, patient weight. Tomorrow would bring news vans. It would bring veterans at the gate and trolls in the comments, and a school that wanted absolution cheaper than change. It would bring a call she might answer. It would bring the first planning session for an assembly that could either wound or heal. But today gave her a hallway with no laughter, a ribbon tied badly by kind hands, an apology spoken without excuses, and a queen learning how to exist without a crown. She held those four-like stones in her pocket and stepped off the bus into a wind that smelled, faintly, like rain and cedar. By the next week, Jefferson was no longer just a high school, it was a stage, and Lena Park was the reluctant centerpiece of a play she had never auditioned for. News vans camped outside the gates, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like alien antennae. Reporters leaned over barricades, shouting questions as students filed in. Lena, how did it feel when General Kane saluted you? Do you want to enlist after graduation? What message do you have for the country? The principal had doubled security, posting local police at the entrances, but the flood of curiosity didn't stop. Students walked past the cameras with wide-eyed fascination, some ducking their heads, others whispering to one another about how their school had become the center of a national story. Inside, the walls buzzed with an energy Lena couldn't escape. Screens glowed with clips of her on the football field holding the flag, weeping, standing tall. Her father's name was trending. For the first time, strangers spoke it with reverence instead of forgetting it. But the attention was a double-edged blade. Veterans groups began showing up, some in uniform, some in old leather jackets, patched with the insignias of wars long past. They brought flowers, letters, challenge coins pressed into her hands with silent gratitude. One old Marine, his hands shaking with Parkinson's, saluted her in the cafeteria, his eyes glassy with memories of comrades buried decades before. Yet for every gesture of honor, there were shadows. Online trolls emerged, faceless accounts mocking her with the same words Alyssa had once used. Daddy's not coming home, soldier girl. Others accused her of lying, of being a plant, of chasing fame. One anonymous email simply read, "Heroes die. Stop pretending." The words stung sharper than any cafeteria insult. She printed it, folded it, and tucked it into her father's jacket pocket. Another weight to carry. At home, her mother, once a fortress of silence, finally broke. That night, she came into Lena's room, sat on the edge of her bed, and held the flag with trembling hands. "I couldn't," her mother whispered, eyes filling with tears. "I couldn't talk about him. Every word was a knife. But you wear him like armor. You've been braver than me all along." It was the first time in 5 years Lena had seen her mother cry for her father. And as they wept together, the distance between them, built from grief and silence, finally began to crumble. But the storm was not finished. The next morning, Lena opened her locker to find another note. Not scribbled like before, but typed, printed, deliberate. "Respect doesn't erase truth. He died. You can't carry him forever." Her stomach twisted. This wasn't a random troll. This was someone inside the school. Someone who had seen the ceremony, the medal, the salute, and still wanted to break her. And when she looked up, across the crowded hallway, she caught Alyssa watching her. The paper crinkled in Lena's fist, its words burrowing into her chest like shards of glass. She read it again, though she didn't need to. "Respect doesn't erase a truth. He died. You can't carry him forever." This wasn't cafeteria mockery. It wasn't an impulsive jeer scribbled in marker. It was calculated, typed, aimed to wound. She stuffed the note deep into her jacket pocket, but her eyes swept the hallway. That was when she saw Alyssa Crane. Standing near the lockers, books hugged tight to her chest, eyes wide with something Lena couldn't name: guilt, fear, or maybe just the panic of a dethroned monarch. Their gazes locked, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the hallway dissolved. Alyssa's lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She turned abruptly, vanishing into the tide of students. The suspicion clawed at Lena's stomach. Alyssa had motive. She had been the cruelest voice, the loudest mocker, the one who had weaponized Lena's grief for sport. Could the note be hers? A desperate strike to claw back power? But something about it felt different. Alyssa had always wanted an audience. This note was made for shadows. By lunch, the whispers had returned, but not about Lena. About the note. News traveled faster than locks could close. Somebody's still after her. It's probably Alyssa. Or maybe Ethan trying to cover up. The cafeteria was a powder keg. ROTC kids sat stiff-backed, glaring at anyone who so much as chuckled. Ethan hunched over his tray, not eating, his face pale. Alyssa sat alone for the first time in years, her followers scattering like birds sensing a storm. Lena tried to ignore it, tried to steady her fork in trembling hands, but the note felt like it pulsed in her pocket, alive, whispering. That evening, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She nearly ignored it, but something in her gut told her otherwise. Lena Park? The voice was steel, wrapped in velvet. General Kane. Yes, ma'am, Lena whispered, heart hammering. There was a pause, the kind commanders used when weighing how much truth a soldier could take. I heard about the note. Lena's chest tightened. How? Your principal sent me a copy. The silence stretched. Listen to me carefully, Kane said. The weight of a legacy attracts two kinds of people, the brave who wish to honor it, and the cowards who want to break it. The cowards will always find paper, keyboards, whispers. That's what they have instead of courage. Lena bit her lip until she tasted blood. But why here? Why now? I thought, after... Her throat closed. Because humiliation doesn't vanish overnight. Envy doesn't either. Yesterday you were beneath them. Today you are above them. Some will not forgive that shift. Lena's eyes burned. So what do I do? You stand taller, Kane said, her voice unflinching. You do not shrink for the shadows. If you bend now, they win twice, once in laughter, and again in silence. But if you carry your father's name without apology, they break against you like waves against stone. Lena closed her eyes. She could almost feel her father's hand on her shoulder again. Kane's voice softened, just enough to slip through the cracks. He was my soldier. He was your father. And he would tell you the same thing I am now. The strongest weapon you have is dignity. Wield it like a blade. When the call ended, Lena sat in the dark of her room, the glow of her phone fading. She took the note from her pocket, stared at the cruel letters, and then tore it in half. And again, until the pieces littered her desk like ashes. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Whoever had written it hadn't fired their last shot. And tomorrow, the battlefield would be the Veterans Day Assembly. Veterans Day arrived with the weight of expectation pressing down on Jefferson High like a storm front. The gymnasium had been converted into a hall of ceremony. Folding chairs lined in military rows, banners of red, white, and blue, strung across the rafters, and a borrowed podium standing like a sentinel at the center of it all. The bleachers overflowed. Parents, local officials, veterans in leather vests stitched with patches of wars long forgotten, even news crews with their cameras perched like vultures, they were all there. And in the middle of the front row sat Lena, the folded flag in her lap, her father's silver star pinned above her heart. The whispers had followed her into the gym. The typed notes, the suspicion, the unspoken question. Would she speak? Principal Corman fumbled through the opening remarks, his voice cracking under the weight of the occasion. A choir of students sang the anthem, shaky but earnest. One by one, local veterans took the stage, their stories brief, their eyes heavy with memory. Then came the moment. Lena Park, Corman said, his voice booming through the microphone, has asked to share a few words with us today. The gym inhaled as one. Lena stood, the flag still in her arms, the metal glinting under the harsh gym lights. She climbed the steps to the podium, every camera lens finding her, every eye burning with expectation. For a moment, she said nothing. She looked out at the crowd, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She could feel the paper ghosts of the cruel notes in her pockets, feel the laughter from weeks ago still echoing in the walls. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but cut like a blade. You all saw me in his uniform. Some of you laughed. Some of you mocked me. Some of you taped notes to my locker. You asked why I wore it. You assumed it was for attention. You never asked what it meant. The silence was absolute. My father, Master Sergeant Daniel Park, died in Fallujah. He died dragging his soldiers to safety while bullets ripped the air around him. He gave everything he had, and all I have left is this jacket, these dog tags, and the memory of a man who believed in dignity more than survival. Every year, I wear his uniform to remember him. Not for you, not for attention, for him. Her voice broke, but she pressed forward. And yet, in this school, in these halls, I became a target. Because different is dangerous, isn't it? Because grief is uncomfortable. Because it's easier to laugh at what you don't understand than to ask. A murmur ran through the bleachers, guilt, shame, unease. Lena's hands tightened on the podium. But here's what you don't see. There are more like me. Kids walking through these hallways carrying weights you never notice. Brothers who didn't come home. Parents working 3 jobs. Families breaking in silence. We're surrounded by people fighting battles you can't see. And every cruel word, every laugh, every note it cuts, deeper than you'll ever know. She paused. Her throat ached. Her father's voice whispered in her mind, "Stand tall." So I'll stand. I'll wear his uniform again and again. Because his story deserves to be told. And so do the stories of everyone carrying a burden you don't see. If you want to mock me, mock me. But understand you're mocking a man who gave his life so you could stand here free. You're mocking every unseen sacrifice walking beside you. The gym was stone still. Then a voice broke through. Shaky. Raw. It was Alyssa Crane. She stood in the bleachers, tears streaking down her face, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "I mocked you," she cried. "I said things I can't take back. I hurt you. I hurt your father's memory, and I can't fix it." Her knees buckled, and she nearly collapsed, her entourage frozen behind her. "But I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The confession detonated in the gym like a shell. Gas rippled. Cameras pivoted, catching the queen of Jefferson High stripped of her throne, naked in her guilt. Ethan Hayes rose next. His voice cracked but carried. "Me too. I made jokes. I treated her like a punchline. I'm ashamed." Then another, and another. Students began to stand, some who had laughed, some who had stayed silent. A tide of confession and shame, rising like a flood, crashing against the silence that had ruled Jefferson High. Lena gripped the podium. For once, she didn't feel like she was drowning in grief. She felt like she was leading. And in that moment, Jefferson High transformed not with medals or salutes, but with honesty, shame, and the fragile beginnings of respect. Winter settled early in Ohio. The sky the color of steel when Lena and her mother boarded the train to Washington, D.C. The folded flag rode in Lena's lap, as if it refused to be stored anywhere but her arms. She had declined interviews, ignored cameras, turned away from reporters. This journey wasn't for the world, it was for him. Arlington was quiet when they arrived. Snow lay in patches across the ground, thin and fragile, not yet the heavy blanket that would come later. The endless rows of white headstones stretched across the horizon, uniform and silent, soldiers still standing at attention in death. They found him, Master Sergeant Daniel Park. Beloved father, United States Marine Corps. Fallujah, Iraq. Lena sank to her knees in the frozen grass, the folded flag still in her arms. Her breath fogged the air, her fingers numb, but her heart beat steady. For years she had avoided this place, terrified it would make the loss permanent. But today, she wasn't afraid. She placed the flag at the base of the stone, her gloves brushing snow from the etched letters. Her mother knelt beside her, silent tears streaking her face, the kind of tears that carried years of silence breaking at last. Lena reached into her jacket and removed the silver star. She turned it in her palm, the metal heavy, cold, gleaming in the gray light. "It's not just yours anymore, Dad," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "It's ours, and I'll carry it. Every day, I'll carry you." She set the metal carefully against the stone. Snowflakes clung to its edges, as if trying to keep it from freezing. The wind shifted, and for the briefest moment, she could almost hear his laugh again, the low, warm rumble that used to fill their kitchen on Saturday mornings. She closed her eyes, and in that silence, she felt him. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as strength inside her bones. Her mother touched her shoulder. "He would be proud of you," she said softly. "So proud." Lena rose slowly, brushing the snow from her knees. She looked at the endless rows of headstones, each one a story, each one a legacy carried by someone left behind. She knew now she wasn't alone. There were others like her, walking among crowds that didn't see the weight they bore. She turned toward the cemetery gates, her boots crunching in the snow, each step measured, steady, unbroken. The camera of the world might move on. The gossip of Jefferson High might fade. But this moment, this promise would remain. Because heroes do not vanish, they live on in the children who refuse to let the world forget. Lena Park walked away from her father's grave taller than she had ever been.